The jungle floor erupted beneath his boot. Miguel Santos didn't see the mound until it was too late. Within seconds, thousands of tiny jaws locked onto his flesh, and the world became nothing but fire. His screams echoed through the Costa Rican rainforest as venom pumped into his bloodstream. Each ant a hypodermic needle of pure agony. His guide would later describe the sound as something inhuman, a primal wail that made birds scatter from the canopy above. By the time they pulled him free, his leg had swollen to twice its normal size, the skin bubbling with welts that looked like they'd been pressed with hot coals. But Miguel was lucky. He'd only stepped on fire ants. What he didn't know, what most people wandering through jungles and deserts don't understand, is that the world of ant bites exists on a spectrum of horror that ranges from uncomfortable irritation to pain so severe it can make a grown man wish for death. Some ant species have evolved venom so potent, so specifically designed to inflict maximum suffering, that scientists had to create an entirely new pain scale just to measure it. And tonight, you're going to feel every level of that scale. If you're ready to experience the venom yourself, smash that like button and subscribe so you never miss what attacks next. The science of ant venom is a masterpiece of evolutionary warfare. While most people think of ants as simple nuisance insects, the truth is far more disturbing. These creatures have spent millions of years perfecting their chemical weapons, developing venoms that target specific nerve receptors designed to maximize pain while minimizing the energy cost of production. Each species has crafted its own signature cocktail of alkaloids, peptides, and enzymes, turning their bodies into living syringes capable of delivering torment in doses measured in micrograms. To understand what makes an ant bite truly horrific, you need to understand the Schmidt Pain Index, a scale that ranks insect stings from 1 to 4 based on pure subjective agony. Schmidt, an entomologist who deliberately allowed himself to be stung by over 80 different species, described the experience of cataloging ant bites as a journey through ascending circles of hell. And on this scale, even the lowest ranks can leave you questioning your decision to step outside. Starting at number 10, we have the Acrobat Ant, a species so named for its habit of holding its abdomen high above its head, like a scorpion preparing to strike. Found throughout North America, these ants deliver what Schmidt rated as barely a 1 on his pain scale. The bite feels like a small pinch, followed by a brief, burning sensation, as if someone touched a lit match to your skin for just a second before pulling it away. The venom contains formic acid, the same chemical that gives vinegar its sting, but in concentrations so mild that most people barely react. A construction worker in Arizona once reported sitting on a nest of acrobat ants during his lunch break, receiving dozens of bites across his legs and lower back. His description was almost dismissive. Felt like sitting on crumbs that were slightly warm. The redness faded within hours, the pain within minutes. But don't let this gentle introduction fool you. The acrobat ant is merely the opening act, the baseline against which all other suffering will be measured. Number 9 brings us to the Pharaoh ant, a tiny yellow species that has infested buildings across every continent except Antarctica. These ants are so small that their bites often go unnoticed until you see the tiny red dot left behind. The pain registers as barely perceptible, a slight irritation that feels more like an itch than actual damage. Hospital workers have reported feeling these bites while restocking medical supplies, tiny pinpricks that disappear almost as soon as they're felt. The venom is weak, designed more for subduing other insects than defending against large predators. In fact, most people bitten by Pharaoh ants assume they've simply scraped their skin on something sharp. The bite leaves no lasting mark, no swelling, no real discomfort beyond a moment of minor annoyance. But this creature's placement on our list serves a purpose. It shows you where the scale begins, the absolute minimum of what an ant bite can be, so you can fully appreciate the exponential increase in suffering that's coming. At number 8, we encounter the Odorous House Ant, named for the distinctive rotten coconut smell it releases when crushed. These ants rarely bite humans, preferring to spray formic acid as a defense mechanism, but when they do sink their mandibles into flesh, the experience rate's slightly higher than the previous entries. A homeowner in Portland described the sensation as similar to being snapped by a rubber band, a sharp little jolt followed by a warm tingling that spreads outward from the bite site. The area might develop a small raised bump, pink and slightly tender to the touch, but nothing that would send you running for medical attention. The venom itself is relatively simple, lacking the complex peptides that make higher-ranked ants so devastating. Within 20 minutes, you'll forget it happened. Within an hour, even the mark will have faded. These bites are the kind you get while gardening, barely worth mentioning in conversation. Certainly nothing that would interrupt your day, but they represent an important threshold. They're the last of the truly mild bites. The final step before we cross into territory where the word pain starts to carry real weight. Number 7 introduces us to the thief ant, a species that earns its name by invading the nests of larger ants and stealing their larvae for food. These tiny yellow ants deliver a sting that Schmidt described as slight and ephemeral, comparable to a single granule of sugar rubbing against your skin. The sensation is so minimal that many victims do not realize they've been bitten until they notice a small red spot hours later. A pest control technician in Florida once allowed himself to be bitten multiple times by thief ants while demonstrating their harmlessness to a nervous client. His description was clinical and unimpressed, like being poked with a hair. You feel pressure more than pain. The venom contains only trace amounts of the chemicals that cause real suffering, barely enough to trigger even a mild inflammatory response. Most bites resolve themselves within minutes, leaving behind nothing but a memory of brief, forgettable discomfort. But here's what matters. These 7 species represent the bottom tier of ant bites, the ones that won't ruin your day or send you to the emergency room. They're the baseline, the control group in this horrific experiment. Because from here forward, every rank on this list represents a quantum leap in agony. The mild irritation you've just heard about is about to transform into something that will make grown men weep and seasoned adventurers reconsider their life choices. The real pain is just beginning. Number 6 brings us into contact with the common red ant, also known as the European fire ant, a species that has earned its fiery reputation across 2 continents. When this ant bites, it doesn't simply pierce the skin and withdraw. It latches on with powerful mandibles, anchoring itself to your flesh before curling its abdomen forward to drive its stinger deep into the wound it just created. The venom that floods into your tissue contains elevated levels of formic acid mixed with histamine compounds that trigger immediate inflammation. A hiker in Scotland described stepping into a nest of these ants while crossing a meadow, receiving over 40 bites across both feet before he could kick his boots off. His account paints a visceral picture. It felt like someone was holding lit cigarettes against my skin. But the burning wouldn't stop. It kept intensifying for 5, maybe 10 minutes, until my feet looked like they'd been scalded with boiling water. The welts that form from red ant bites are distinctive. Raised white centers surrounded by angry red halos that throb with each heartbeat. The pain peaks around 15 minutes after the initial bite. A sharp, hot sensation that makes it difficult to think about anything else. But what makes this species truly miserable is the duration. While the acute pain fades after an hour, the affected area remains tender and swollen for up to 3 days, a constant reminder of your encounter. The itching that follows is almost worse than the original bite. A maddening prickle that seems to live just beneath the skin where you couldn't quite scratch it away. At number 5, we meet the Rover Ant, a dark brown species native to South America, but now spreading across the southern United States like a slow-motion invasion. These ants possess a venom that entomologists describe as disproportionately painful for such a small insect. The bite delivers a sensation that victims consistently compare to being stabbed with a hot needle. A focused point of searing pain that seems to bore deeper into your flesh with each passing second. A landscaper in Houston made the mistake of kneeling in grass where a rover ant colony had established itself beneath the surface. Within moments, 7 ants had climbed his pant leg and delivered synchronized bites along his calf. His description was delivered through gritted teeth. Each bite felt like someone was drilling into my leg with a tiny, superheated drill bit. The pain radiated outward in waves, and I could feel my pulse hammering at each bite site. What makes rover ant venom particularly nasty is its high concentration of kinins, peptides that cause blood vessels to dilate and leak fluid into surrounding tissue. This creates swelling that can be grotesque, turning a simple bite into a raised, fluid-filled blister that takes days to fully resolve. The initial sharp pain mellows into a deep, bruise-like ache that makes walking uncomfortable if the bites are on your legs or gripping objects difficult if they re on your hands. Medical literature documents cases of people developing localized necrosis from multiple rover ant bites, the venom literally killing small patches of skin that later peel away in dark, crusty scabs. Number 4 is where most people's understanding of ant bites begins and ends. The red imported fire ant. The species that has terrorized the American South since its accidental introduction from Brazil in the 1930s. These ants have earned their reputation through sheer aggressive persistence and a venom formula that seems designed by a sadist. When you disturb a fire ant mound, hundreds or thousands of workers boil out of the entrance and swarm up anything nearby. It's climbing quickly and silently until they've spread across your skin. Then, as if receiving a chemical signal, they all bite down and sting simultaneously. A nurse in Alabama recounted backing into a fire ant mound while taking photographs at a state park, unaware of her mistake until the attack began. Her testimony is difficult to hear without flinching. I felt the first sting and looked down to see my entire leg covered in ants. Before I could even process what I was seeing, hundreds of stings hit me at once. It was like being splashed with hot grease, but the burning kept building instead of fading. I was screaming and tearing at my clothes, and I couldn't stop. The pain was everywhere. Fire ant venom contains solanopsin, an alkaloid that kills cells on contact and triggers a massive histamine release. Within minutes, each sting develops into a characteristic white pustule surrounded by a red, swollen ring. These pustules are sterile abscesses, pockets of dead tissue and immune cells that your body walls off because it can't break down the venom fast enough. The burning sensation persists for hours, a constant, inescapable heat that over-the-counter pain medication barely touches. But the worst part comes days later, when the pustules begin to itch with an intensity that can only be described as maddening. Scratching them open risks serious bacterial infection, but not scratching requires a level of willpower that most people simply don't possess. Some victims report being unable to sleep for 3 or 4 nights after a major fire ant attack, the itching and residual pain creating a special kind of torture that infiltrates every moment of consciousness. But as horrific as fire ant attacks can be, as much suffering as they've inflicted on millions of people, they represent only the middle of our scale. Schmidt himself, after enduring hundreds of fire ant stings in the name of science, rated them as a 2, maybe a low 3 on his 4-point scale. He described the sensation as sharp, sudden, mildly alarming, like walking across a shag carpet and reaching for the light switch. Uncomfortable, yes. Memorable, certainly. But nowhere close to the upper limits of what ant venom can achieve. The species ranked above the fire ant do just hurt more. They hurt in ways that seem to transcend normal pain, that reach into your nervous system and play it like an instrument of pure suffering. And the gap between number 4 and number 3 is vast. A chasm so wide that people who've experienced both say there's no comparison, that they occupy entirely different categories of human experience. The question isn't whether you could endure what comes next. The question is whether you'd ever be the same afterward. Number 3 delivers us to the nightmare realm of the Florida harvester ant. a species that Schmidt rated as a full 3 on his pain scale, with a description that has become legendary among entomologists: bold and unrelenting. Like somebody is using a power drill to excavate your ingrown toenail. This ant doesn't inhabit dense jungles or remote wilderness. It builds its nests in sandy soil throughout the southeastern United States, often in areas where children play and families picnic, completely unaware of the biochemical horror lurking inches beneath the surface. The harvester ant's venom contains one of the highest concentrations of toxic proteins found in any insect, a mixture so potent that a single sting can cause localized tissue death. When the stinger penetrates your skin, it doesn't simply inject venom and withdraw. The ant grips with its mandibles and pumps repeatedly, delivering multiple doses while twisting its body to drive the stinger deeper. A wildlife photographer in Georgia learned about harvester ants the hard way while setting up equipment near what he thought was an abandoned burrow. 3 ants climbed his boot and delivered stings to his ankle before he noticed them. His written account, published in a natural history journal, describes the experience with disturbing clarity. The pain didn't build gradually, it detonated. One moment I felt the small pinch of the bite. The next moment, it was like someone had injected liquid fire directly into my bone marrow. I actually vomited from the intensity, just dropped to my knees and retched while my vision went white around the edges. The pain radiated up my entire leg, made my hip joint ache. And I could feel my heartbeat thundering in the sting site like it was going to burst through the skin. What makes harvester ant venom so devastating is its high concentration of phospholipase enzymes that literally dissolve cell membranes, turning healthy tissue into a soup of dead cells and inflammatory chemicals. The immediate pain is accompanied by swelling so severe that the affected limb can increase in circumference by 30% within an hour. The skin becomes tight and shiny, stretched over fluid-filled tissue that throbs with each pulse of blood. Medical case files document harvester ant victims arriving at emergency rooms in tears, begging for morphine, describing pain levels that exceed kidney stones and natural childbirth. The acute phase lasts between 4 and 6 hours, a stretch of time that victims describe as feeling eternal, each minute crawling past while the venom continues its work of destruction. Even after the peak pain subsides, the affected area remains exquisitely tender for weeks. Light pressure that wouldn't normally register becomes agonizing. One victim reported being unable to wear shoes for 12 days after receiving 3 stings to his foot, the simple act of sliding on a sock causing such intense pain that he abandoned the attempt and called in sick to work. The necrotic tissue at the sting site eventually blackens and sloughs away, leaving behind small craters in the skin that scar permanently. Physical reminders of an encounter that most survivors describe as genuinely traumatic. At number 2, we arrive at the Maricopa harvester ant, a species that holds a grim distinction in the scientific literature. It possesses the most toxic venom of any insect on Earth, measured by LD50 dosage. This venom is 12 times more potent than that of a honeybee and rivals some snake venoms in terms of raw killing power. Native to the deserts of Arizona and New Mexico, the Maricopa harvester has been responsible for multiple human deaths, usually in cases where victims suffered from severe allergies or received hundreds of stings in a coordinated attack. Schmidt rated this ant as for the highest possible rating on his scale, and his description strips away any pretense of scientific detachment. After 8 unrelenting minutes of drilling into that ingrown toenail, you find the drill is wedged into the toe. The sensation is intense, sharp, and immediate, with pain that radiates and seems to persist long after the insult. A rancher in southern Arizona shared his experience of accidentally kneeling on a Maricopa nest while repairing a fence. He received 11 stings across his knee and thigh before he could scramble away. His testimony, given weeks later, after he'd finally processed the trauma, paints a picture of suffering that borders on the incomprehensible. "I've broken bones. I've been kicked by horses and gored by cattle. I've had my hand caught in machinery that crushed 2 fingers. None of that prepared me for this. The pain was so intense that I couldn't form words, couldn't even scream properly. It came out as this strangled, gasping sound while I rolled in the dirt trying to. I don't even know what I was trying to do. Escape my own body? Maybe? The venom of the Maricopa harvester contains extremely high levels of barbitolacin, a peptide that attacks red blood cells and causes them to rupture, releasing their contents into the bloodstream. In sufficient quantities, this can lead to acute kidney failure as the organs struggle to filter the flood of cellular debris. The pain itself is caused by multiple mechanisms working in concert. Nerve receptors are directly activated by venom peptides. Blood vessels dilate catastrophically, causing massive pressure on surrounding tissue. And the immune system launches such an aggressive response that the inflammation itself becomes a source of additional agony. Victims describe the pain as having layers, each one distinct and terrible. There's the immediate sharp burning at the sting site, the deep aching throb that spreads through the entire limb, the electric jolts that shoot up toward the core of the body with each movement, and underneath it all, a nauseating sensation that some describe as feeling like the venom is eating them from the inside out. The acute phase can last 8 to 12 hours, and during that time, most victims are completely incapacitated, unable to do anything but endure. Sleep is impossible. Distraction is impossible. There is only the pain, vast and all-consuming, and the slow crawl of minutes that feel like hours. Emergency room physicians report that Maricopa harvester ant victims require 4 pain medication and close monitoring for signs of systemic toxicity. Even after the venom begins to break down, even after the worst has passed, victims are left with lasting effects: localized numbness, episodes of shooting pain triggered by temperature changes or pressure, and psychological impacts that range from heightened anxiety to full post-traumatic stress responses when they see ants of any species. But there is one ant, one species that exists in a category beyond even the Maricopa harvester. One ant whose sting has become legendary not just among scientists but in the indigenous cultures that have lived alongside it for thousands of years. An ant whose venom has been studied, analyzed, and dissected, yet remains so uniquely, horrifyingly painful that no amount of preparation can ready you for the reality of its sting. And when you hear what awaits at number 1, you'll understand why some researchers have dedicated their entire careers to studying this single species, trying to understand how evolution could create something so perfectly designed to inflict maximum suffering on anything unfortunate enough to encounter it. Number 1 is the bullet ant Paraponera clavata, a creature that stands alone at the apex of insect-inflicted agony. This ant doesn't just hurt. It redefines what you thought pain could be. Found in the rainforests of Central and South America, the bullet ant earned its name from the sensation its sting produces, a feeling that victims universally compared to being shot with a firearm. Schmidt rated it as a pure 4+ beyond the top of his scale, and his description has become famous in entomological circles: pure, intense, brilliant pain. Like walking over flaming charcoal with a 3-inch nail embedded in your heel. But those words, as vivid as they are, fail to capture the full dimension of what a bullet ant sting actually does to a human nervous system. This is pain that transcends description, that exists in a realm where language itself breaks down and becomes inadequate. A documentary filmmaker in the Amazon basin agreed to be stung by a bullet ant while cameras rolled, believing his years of experience with painful insects had prepared him for the ordeal. The footage is difficult to watch. Within 30 seconds of the sting, his face contorts into an expression of such raw suffering that the crew initially thought he was having a heart attack. He collapses, writhing on the ground, and for the next 3 hours he drifts in and out of lucidity, sometimes screaming, sometimes just moaning in a continuous low-pitched wail that sounds like it's being torn from somewhere deep in his chest. At one point, he looks directly at the camera and says, through tears streaming down his face. "I can't do this. I can't. Please make it stop. Please." There was nothing anyone could do. There is no anti-venom for bullet ant stings. There is no way to neutralize the venom once it's been injected. There is only endurance, the brutal requirement that you survive the next 12 to 24 hours of unrelenting torment. The pain doesn't stay localized. It spreads from the sting site like a wildfire, racing up through your arm or leg, reaching your shoulder or hip within minutes. A biologist who studies bullet ants professionally, who has been stung 4 times over the course of his career. I genuinely believed that something inside me had ruptured, that I had minutes to live. He paused in his account. And when he continued, his voice was quieter. "It never did. Not for hours. You just endure it, and it changes you." Every person I know who's been stung, we all have this look in our eyes when bullet ants come up in conversation. We know something that other people don't, something about the upper limits of conscious suffering. Indigenous tribes in the Amazon have incorporated bullet ant stings into coming-of-age rituals, most famously the Saturmal people of Brazil. Young men seeking to prove their manhood must wear gloves woven with hundreds of bullet ants, stingers facing inward, for 10 minutes. Most boys scream, many vomit. Some pass out from the pain before the time expires, their nervous systems simply shutting down from the overload of pain signals. Those who complete the ritual often spend the next day in a state of semi-consciousness, their arms swollen to grotesque proportions, trembling uncontrollably from the venom's neurotoxic effects. And this ritual must be completed 20 times before a boy is considered a man. 20 times. The fact that anyone survives this speaks to the horrifying truth about bullet ant venom. It's designed to hurt, not to kill. The ant gains no survival advantage from your death. What it needs is for you to remember, with crystal clarity, that you never want to experience that pain again. The venom is a teaching tool, an evolutionary adaptation refined over millions of years to create an association so strong, so traumatic that predators learn to avoid bullet ants after a single encounter. And it works. Monkeys that have been stung by bullet ants will abandon entire sections of forest, refusing to return even when food is scarce elsewhere. Birds have been observed changing their migration routes to avoid areas with high bullet ant populations. These creatures have learned, through direct and terrible experience, that no meal is worth the risk of encountering that sting again. The aftermath of a bullet ant sting can last for days. The initial 12-hour acute phase, where the pain is so severe that morphine barely takes the edge off, eventually transitions into a secondary phase where the affected limb feels simultaneously numb and hypersensitive. Light touch triggers electric shocks. Temperature changes cause stabbing pains. The lymph nodes in your armpit or groin swell to the size of golf balls as your immune system goes into overdrive trying to process the venom. Some victims develop tremors that can persist for weeks, their hands shaking so badly they can't write or hold a cup of coffee. Sleep disturbances are common, both from lingering physical discomfort and from the psychological impact of having experienced pain so intense that it sits in your memory like a traumatic injury. Medical researchers have studied bullet ant venom extensively, hoping to understand its mechanisms well enough to develop new classes of pain medication. If they can isolate exactly how ponerotoxin creates such intense suffering, perhaps they can develop drugs that block those specific pathways. But progress has been slow because the venom works through multiple simultaneous mechanisms. A cocktail of different peptides that attack your nervous system from several angles at once. It's not a single key fitting a single lock. It's a master thief with tools for every door in the house, each one opening a new dimension of agony. And as scientists continue their work as they expose themselves to carefully controlled doses of venom in laboratory settings, as they chart the electrical activity in their own nerves while enduring the pain for the sake of knowledge, one thing becomes clear. Nature, in creating the bullet ant, has perfected the art of suffering. The long-term effects of bullet ant stings extend far beyond the initial day of acute suffering. Medical literature documents cases of chronic regional pain syndrome developing after severe stings, a condition where the nervous system remains stuck in a state of heightened sensitivity months or even years after the venom has been completely metabolized and cleared from the body. A conservation worker in French Guiana, stung on the hand while clearing trail vegetation, reported still experiencing episodes of severe pain 18 months later. The attacks would come without warning, sudden flares of burning sensation that radiated from the old sting site up through his wrist and forearm, sometimes so intense that he would drop whatever he was holding. Neurologists examining him found that the nerves in his hand had been permanently altered, their firing thresholds lowered to the point where stimuli that should register as mild pressure or slight warmth would trigger full pain responses. His case is not unique. Dozens of documented bullet ant victims report similar chronic symptoms, their bodies carrying scars not just in tissue, but in the nervous system itself, phantom echoes of that original trauma that resurfaced unpredictably. Some describe it as feeling like the venom left something behind. Not chemically, but informationally, as if their nerves learned a new language of suffering and never quite forgot how to speak it. Physical therapy helps some patients. Nerve blocks provide temporary relief for others. But for a significant percentage, the ghost of the bullet ant sting becomes a permanent companion, a reminder that some experiences literally rewire you at a fundamental level. Beyond individual suffering, bullet ants represent an ongoing threat to human expansion into rainforest territories. As logging operations, agricultural development, and ecotourism push deeper into the Amazon basin, encounters between humans and bullet ants increase exponentially. Construction workers clearing land for roads have reported mass stinging incidents involving dozens of ants, attacking multiple victims simultaneously. These colony defense responses can be catastrophic. A crew working in Ecuador experienced such an attack when heavy equipment disturbed a massive bullet ant nest hidden in the root system of a felled tree. 17 men were stung, some receiving multiple stings as panicked ants swarmed over anyone nearby. 3 workers had to be evacuated by helicopter to receive emergency medical care, their symptoms progressing beyond just pain to include dangerous blood pressure spikes, cardiac arrhythmias triggered by the stress response, and one case of rhabdomyolysis, where muscle tissue began breaking down from the combination of venom effects and the violent physical convulsions the victim experienced. During the acute pain phase, medical facilities in remote regions are often unprepared for bullet ant casualties. They lack the IV pain medications needed to provide even minimal relief, leaving victims to simply endure in conditions that would be considered inhumane for any other form of suffering. Stories circulate among jungle communities of men who were never quite the same after bullet ant attacks, who developed phobias so severe they refused to work outdoors again, who would wake screaming from nightmares years later, still trapped in the memory of that unending pain. The evolutionary purpose behind such extreme venom potency continues to fascinate and disturb researchers. Bullet ants are not particularly aggressive hunters. They feed primarily on nectar and small arthropods that don't require such devastating venom to subdue. The sting evolved purely as a defensive weapon, deterrent so effective that it borders on overkill for most practical purposes. But from an evolutionary perspective, overkill is exactly the point. A predator that merely dies from ant venom might not live long enough to learn avoidance, and its offspring would have to learn the same lesson through the same fatal encounter. But a predator that experiences truly unforgettable pain and survives will never make that mistake again, and will actively teach its offspring to avoid these ants through behavioral example. The bullet ant has essentially weaponized memory, turned pain itself into an information transfer system that ensures its survival across generations of potential threats. This strategy has proven so successful that bullet ant colonies can thrive in areas with high predator density, their reputation preceding them like an invisible force field. Camera trap footage from the Amazon shows jaguars carefully stepping around bullet ant trails, their massive paws placed with delicate precision to avoid disturbing the tiny insects that could bring them to their knees. Coatis, normally aggressive and curious creatures, will abandon investigation of interesting scents if they detect the specific pheromone markers that indicate bullet ant territory. Even humans, with all our technology and medical knowledge, have learned to fear these ants, to step carefully and watch where we place our hands in regions where they're known to nest. Recent research has uncovered even more disturbing details about bullet ant venom composition. Scientists at the University of Queensland identified previously unknown peptides in the venom that may have additional effects beyond immediate pain induction. Some of these compounds appear to trigger lasting changes in how the immune system responds to future stings, potentially creating a sensitization effect where subsequent encounters produce even more severe reactions. This raises the terrifying possibility that bullet ant stings could get worse each time you experience them, your body becoming progressively more vulnerable rather than building immunity. Other research has focused on the psychological dimension of bullet ant trauma. Psychologists interviewing sting victims years after their encounters found consistent patterns of hypervigilance, avoidance behaviors, and intrusive memories that meet clinical criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder. One victim described seeing an ant, any ant, even a harmless species thousands of miles from bullet ant habitat, and feeling immediate panic, his heart rate spiking and his palms sweating as his body remembered that pain and prepared to experience it again. The mind, it seems, cannot help but remain on guard against a threat that caused such overwhelming suffering. This psychological scarring may be as much a part of the bullet ant's defensive strategy as the venom itself. An animal that not only remembers the pain but actively fears its recurrence will go to even greater lengths to avoid future encounters, will teach its young more urgently, will alter its behavior more dramatically. The bullet ant has managed to embed itself not just in the flesh of its victims, but in their minds, becoming a presence that lingers long after the physical wounds have healed. The question of whether worse ant species might exist somewhere in unexplored rainforest keeps some researchers awake at night. The Amazon basin remains one of the most biodiverse and understudied ecosystems on Earth, with new insect species discovered every year. Indigenous tribes occasionally report ants with stings that make even the bullet ant seem mild. Though these accounts are difficult to verify and may be exaggerated through cultural transmission, but the possibility remains that somewhere in a remote valley or on an isolated mountain ridge, there exists an ant species that has pushed venom evolution even further into the realm of pure suffering. For now, the bullet ant holds its crown as the undisputed king of painful insect stings, a creature so perfectly adapted to inflict maximum agony that scientists use its venom as a benchmark, the standard against which all other pain is measured. And perhaps that's enough. Perhaps nature, in creating the bullet ant, has already reached the theoretical limit of how much pain a small insect can inflict without killing its target. Or perhaps somewhere in the green darkness of the world's last wild places, something worse is waiting to be discovered. An ant with venom that will force scientists to extend the pain scale beyond 4 to create new language for suffering that currently has no name. Until that day comes, if it ever does, the bullet ant remains the final word in nature's arsenal of agony. A reminder that sometimes the smallest creatures carry the most terrible weapons. But what if I told you there's something even worse waiting in the shadows? Something that makes these bites feel like a paper cut. Click the video on screen right now. The most painful stings and bites in the world ranked,